there was also a lot of talk about the security guarantees that Russia has proposed for itself and NATO to prevent further escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. Russia is still waiting for concrete answers from NATO and the West, although we have heard from Washington, which has called the proposals that Russia has put forward non-starter negotiating points. For the German foreign minister's part, though, she said that the German government is ready for serious discussions about these proposals, while she also demanded security guarantees from Russia, since she said that Russian troops are somehow threatening the Russian troops that are located on Russian territory near Ukraine. As for Lavrov, though, he said that the Russian state has the right to do what it wants within its own territory.
In recent weeks, more than 100,000 Russian troops and military equipment were amassed near the Ukrainian border without any visible reason. It's hard to consider this as anything other than a threat.
We explained that the provocation coming from many Western politicians is making it necessary for our troops to conduct combat training measures, and we explained that we cannot accept certain demands regarding the actions of our armed forces on our own soil. We drew attention to the fact that while the US and other NATO members are demanding the removal of our forces, they are positioning troops, including troops who have arrived in Europe from overseas. The double standard here is obvious.
It does seem, though, that the two foreign ministers do see eye to eye on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. Baerbock said that Europe needs Russia to be a reliable supplier of gas to solve this energy crisis that's right now plaguing the continent, while Lavrov said that he had a long talk with his German counterpart about the unfortunate politicization of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So a lot of topics were discussed at this press conference between the foreign ministers of Germany and Russia.
The Kremlin, in the meantime, has warned even the most respected mainstream media have now abandoned the most basic fact-checking. This comes after the New York Times cited an unnamed official that Moscow was pulling out Kiev embassy staff ahead of invading Ukraine. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova noted that printing such sensationalist lies has turned Western outlets into little more than anti-Russian PR operations.
America's New York Times newspaper is now an agent of Ukraine's security service. Through it, the source of this fantasy structure has promoted another supposed sensation, suggesting that the Russian embassy in Kiev is being evacuated. The Russian embassy and consulates general in Ukraine are operating as normal, and the American journalists have lost their culture of checking published data, even though we have published many materials on this issue.
Well, the Times piece is just the latest in a litany of unproven claims that Moscow is readying a Ukrainian invasion. Talks between Russia, the US and NATO have so far failed to dampen tensions. On the contrary, Western politicians have recently ramped up threats of new sanctions against the Kremlin. Well, meanwhile, NATO states are boosting military support to Kiev, with Canada joining the UK in sending troops and special forces. Britain has already shipped missile systems, which it claims are strictly defensive in nature, and the US allies, including Sweden, are reinforcing military positions near Russian borders. Well, let's cross live now to geopolitical analyst Patrick Henningsen, also editor of the 21st Century Wire news outlet. Thanks for joining us, sir. Good to have you on the programme today. Western countries are sending military forces to Ukraine. How do you expect Russia will react? How should it react to this?
Well, I think Russia has to take it very seriously. I mean, it's gone now. It's advanced beyond the stage of just rhetoric and saber rattling. I mean, they've been talking up a Russian invasion in the Western media really for the last couple of months. And it seemed like it was, provocations, more of the usual that we've seen over the last few years. But I think now you're talking about deploying special forces, as Canada is, to, evacuate diplomats and so forth in the event that there's hostilities. So, and the British officials are talking about a Russian invasion like it's a fait accompli. They're basically saying they're going to invade the Ukraine, and it's just going to happen. It's a question of when. Putin's waiting for the opportune moment and so forth. This is what we're seeing in the Western press. And unfortunately, politicians are running with this. And so many times in the past, we've seen where intelligence agencies are feeding the mainstream media with various intelligence or possibilities of scenarios and so forth. And then all of a sudden it materializes in the political sphere. as fact, and then the whole thing starts to develop its own inertia. And this is the dangerous part, and this is why I think personally, and I'm not alone, that the Western media and Western political bodies are playing with fire in the sort of direction they're trying to take this.
The British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has said the weapons supplied to Ukraine pose no threat, no offensive capability. I believe he's quoted them as being anti-tank defensive missiles here. Is that something you believe, and should Russia be concerned about that?
No, I can't see how you can call these defensive weapons, and purely because of this reason. If it has a range, or these are the British equivalent of Javelin missiles that they're talking about. Let's say it has a range of 800 meters. If that weapon is used either from behind the green line, let's take Donbass in eastern Ukraine, for instance, from behind the green line on the Ukrainian side or inside the green line, then it's not a defensive weapon. It's being used as an offensive weapon. It's being used for provocations. So to be able to try to frame this as these are defensive weapons, it simply doesn't add up to the facts on the ground in a battlefield situation. So this can only be viewed, this supplying more and more weapons into Ukrainian military at the time when tensions are being ratcheted up in the West. This can only be translated as a provocation. And so this is extremely dangerous.
What's your take on even non-NATO member states, such as Sweden, for example, deploying troops near Russia's borders? What possible reasons could they have for those kind of deployments?
Well, this is sort of standard fare. I think NATO has been running drills up in the Norway and Sweden's border, up in this region for some time. The U.S. has done major exercises there as well in conjunction with those local military forces. So in a way, it's just more of the same. That's been kind of the routine that we've gotten used to in recent years. However, if you do combine it with what's going on right now, with the absolute attempt to escalate the situation with Ukraine, then it takes on a whole nother meaning. And so, but in and of themselves, Sweden doesn't play any major or significant role militarily in this sort of NATO military setup or within the alliance, even as not a central member or main member of the alliance. It's neither here nor there. What matters, I think, is that you have this whole of European approach or this whole of Western approach orienting itself towards a conflict with Russia. That's the worrying part.
Who do you think stands to benefit from the US sending troops and tanks, other weapons to Ukraine? I mean, surely nobody would benefit from an outright conflict with Russia at this stage. What's the rationale then of bringing things so close to the edge?
Well, certainly, I don't see any benefit for Russia for, quote, invading Ukraine. They have nothing to gain from this at all. However, Russia has made it clear that if civilians are vulnerable, if they're in danger of being killed, or there's some situation like that, they would most likely act on a sort of humanitarian ground or to a defensive peacekeeping ground to do that there. But I think Washington has something to benefit. The U.S., the U.K., and France, for instance, the three primary members of NATO, they are right now, there's the record low confidence in the government, in political leaders in those three countries right now. They're both on their sort of back heels as a result of what's going on domestically. There's general strikes happening in France. There's marches every other week in the capital of all these countries. In the U.S., there's a great disenchantment with the Biden administration, polling at an all-time low. The president's had his vaccine mandates pushed back in the courts. And so what they need is a distraction, and that distraction might come in the form of conflict. That's the big worry, is politically. They're in desperate straits in the U.S., U.K., and France, and this conflict or anything even approaching a conflict, even the threat of a conflict, would dominate the headlines for months, perhaps, and it would be the ultimate distraction I think these governments would benefit from. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, history does have a tendency of repeating itself, unfortunately. Patrick Henningsen, thanks for your take on that story here today.